Good day to everyone. We will now discuss about accountability. This is the flow of our discussion. We begin by defining what is accountability and then the meaning of accountability in relation to responsibility. Then we have the conditions of accountability and the degrees of accountability. The main reference that we are using is from the book of Napoleon Mabacchio Jr. But in this chapter he's also having a reference. So these are the other reference of Napoleon Mabacchio within his book. Feinberg, Nagel, Williams, and Unique. Now we have the definition of accountability. From the base word count or account or to be accountable, accountability is mainly about the deservingness of blame or praise or punishment and reward. There is the moral and legal accountability, but in this discussion, we focus on the moral accountability. The deservingness of blame or praise or the punishment or reward for the actions that we perform is a necessary consequence of our intelligence and freedom. Our intelligence enables us to distinguish between right and wrong actions or between actions that we ought and ought not to do. Our freedom, on the other hand, enables us to choose the kind of action that we should like to perform or to intentionally perform an action. Consequently, in choosing to perform an action that we know to be either right or wrong, we deserve either blame or praise. We in particular deserve blame for choosing to perform an action we know to be wrong, or for choosing not to perform an action we know to be right, while we deserve praise for choosing to perform an action we know to be right, or choosing not to perform an action we know to be wrong. We deserve blame, for instance, when we intentionally and knowingly inflict unnecessary pain to a person, but we deserve praise when we intentionally and knowingly help a person in need. We refer to the deservingness of blame or praise, or punishment or reward for the actions that we do as accountability. It must be emphasized that accountability includes both blame and praise, for accountability is often associated only with blame. Accountability can be of various types such as the legal and moral kinds, based on the kind of principles or the standards that we use in judging an action to be right or wrong. Legal accountability, for instance, results from the application of legal standards, while moral accountability or moral responsibility results from the application of moral standards in assessing the rightness and wrongness of our action. Thus, in legal accountability, a person is given punishment or penalties by the state for performing an illegal action, while he/she is given certain benefits or services by the state, such as police protection and free education for not doing an illegal action. In moral accountability, a person is taught to deserve moral blame for performing an immoral act, while moral praise for performing a moral act. Legal accountability coincides with moral accountability if laws embody moral principles, which does not always happen. For instance, during the period when racial discrimination was legal, acts of white people that racially discriminated black people did not result in legal punishment, though it certainly deserved moral blame. Now we have accountability in relation to responsibility. In our discussion of accountability, we shall assume the moral kind. Discussion of moral standards that are used as basis for judging actions to be morally good or bad. Whenever we use the word accountability, we shall thus mean moral accountability. Now, it is usual to use the word accountability interchangeably with the word responsibility. Zimmerman, for instance, writes, the sort of moral responsibility with which I am concerned here is the familiar. In this sense of responsibility, if someone is responsible for some event, then he is worthy of praise or blame for that event. In addition to the meaning of responsibility as accountability, the word responsibility, however, has other meanings. Though different, these meanings, however, are related in some significant ways to the accountability. And because of this, confusions are bound to happen if we are not mindful of these differences in the meaning of the said term. Thus, in addition to the meaning of responsibility as accountability, we also have the meanings of responsibility as duty and as agency. Responsibility as duty refers to the sense of responsibility in which being responsible means holding certain duties or obligations. Parents, for instance, are responsible for their children in that they hold certain duties or obligations toward their children, which include providing for the physical, spiritual, and educational needs of their children and disciplining them so that they will grow up to become morally upright individuals and socially responsible citizens. It is in fact by this light that we describe someone as a responsible person when he or she is mindful of his or her duties towards other persons, while as an irresponsible one when otherwise. But while responsibility as duty and responsibility as accountability are not the same or do not refer to the same thing, they are, however, closely related in that responsibility as duty gives rise to responsibility as accountability. This is because performing and failing to perform one's duties are themselves actions for which one can deserve blame or praise. That is, we can deserve blame for failing to perform our duties toward other persons, while praise for being able to perform them. Responsibility as agency refers to the sense of responsibility in which being responsible means being the cause of something or being the one that brings about something. Causes can be humans or non-humans, as we can say that the criminal was responsible for or the cause of the death of an innocent bystander. We can also say that the strong wind was responsible for or the cause of the broken glass window. When we speak of human causes of certain actions, philosophers usually refer to these causes as agents. Here, when we say that person X is responsible for a particular action, we just mean that it is person X who does such an action. This obviously is different when we take person X to be responsible for that action in that he or she deserves blame or praise for doing it. Person X may be the agent of such action, but he or she may not deserve blame or praise for performing it. And this is because, as we shall see later, there are conditions for a person to deserve blame or praise for performing an action other than simply being the person who performs it. An agent who also deserves moral blame or praise for the action that he performs is, properly speaking, a moral agent. Moral agents should not be confused with moral recipients. Moral agents are entities who hold certain moral duties, while moral recipients are the targets of these moral duties, and thus are entities who hold moral rights. Moral agents, however, are the necessary moral recipients as well, and thus, in addition to their moral duties, they are necessarily bearers of moral rights as well. On the other hand, moral recipients may or may not be moral agents as well, and thus, in addition to their moral rights, they may or may not have the moral duties. Humans who are rational and free are the usual moral agents, while moral recipients include both humans and non-humans. Moral recipients who are not rational and free include animals and humans whose capacity for rationality and freedom has severely and irreversibly damaged. And for some people, they may also include other non-human members of nature, such as trees. On the other hand, moral recipients who are potentially rational and free, including normal infant and children, to say that we are morally responsible for moral recipients is to say that we have moral duties toward them and that they are the objects of our actions for which we can be morally accountable. In sum, when we say that the person is responsible for an action, we either mean that the person has the duty to perform the action, the person is the agent of the action, or the person deserves blame or praise for performing the action. These meanings are related in some important ways, but they are not the same.